All right, so good morning. My name is Brandon Banlow. I want to share my story with you, and I wanted to discuss everything about business from the start of it, the idea of it, all the way through the build-up, all the things that you are going to encounter building a business. My story starts years ago. I was in the military for over a decade. I served in both wars, Iraq and Afghanistan. When I came out, my last deployment was in 2010. I came back from Afghanistan. My girlfriend at the time was living in Cincinnati, Ohio, so that's where I relocated to, was down in Cincinnati, Ohio. We lived down there. When I came out, I had what everybody has when they come out of the military. I had a bunch of leave saved up. So for the first 90 days, I got out at a good time. It was June, so it was the summertime. So I did what probably anybody does when they're coming out of the military. I decided to take a couple months off and kind of reinvent myself. Had no idea what I was going to do with my life. So at that time, my life consisted of sitting by the pool, having a couple beers, enjoying the sunshine, getting a suntan, and just kind of enjoying life and reintegrating myself back into the civilian world, which was difficult at times, but I managed. When I decided to go back to work, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Prior to going on my last deployment, I worked in collections for a rental company down there in Cincinnati, Ohio. Very tough job, going door to door, knocking on people's doors. Obviously, they're not going to welcome you with open arms because you're repossessing their stuff. I did not want to go back and do that. It was very stressful. I didn't enjoy taking from people. I felt like I more wanted to give to people than take from people. And you find people at their lowest point during that time. So it wasn't something that I was really interested in getting back into. My girlfriend at the time, who ended up becoming my wife, she was managing some properties down there, and she knew the people that were living at the properties on a personal level. There was a large corporation down there that dealt in logistics, and she approached me one day and said, "Hey, why don't you go over and apply at this company and see if you can get in?" I didn't know the first thing about logistics. That's exactly what I told her. I don't know anything about logistics. I highly doubt they're even going to consider me. But she pressured me, and so finally I dropped a resume in there. Long story short, I did get a call back for an interview. I went in and I sat with the person that ultimately ended up hiring me. I started working there just as an assistant. I helped out the brokers in there. I helped out the salespeople, anybody that needed help. I immediately fell in love with the job. The reason I fell in love with the job is because it reminded me pretty much of the military. You know, no 2 days were the same. You had to be an analytical thinker. You really had to be quick on your feet. You had to solve problems. So I enjoyed it. I found myself going into work 6:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. You didn't have to be there until 8. I was usually the first one in the office, and I was normally one of the last ones out of the office, because I enjoyed it so much. I became consumed by it. I wanted to learn everything about it because it was so interesting to me. So for the next couple of years, that's what I did. I maintained inside that company as a assistant, and then I went on and I moved into sales, and I learned that side of the position. And then I moved into a management position over there, and I learned the business even more. So basically, I learned the business from the ground up. The only thing at that point that I did not have any experience in was the administrative or the backside of it, your HR, your accounting, dealing with some of the problems that they go through with logistics and trucking. But everything else inside of the business, I knew backwards and forwards, and that's because I really took the time to learn it. I was talking to my peers, I was talking to management, I would go to any meeting I could get my hand on. I was listening to the people around me, which I thought was very helpful for me, and it could be helpful for you guys if you're trying to learn something. Don't just try to do it all on your own. If somebody has something that's working for them, try to take it, try to adapt it, adopt it, and bring it into what you're doing currently and use it for yourself. It's not stealing their idea, it's making yourself better. The more tools you can put in your toolbox, the better off you're going to be. So I learned that business. Frontwards and backwards, except for the back side of it. Long story short, my girlfriend at the time, she then became my fiance. She got a promotion over to another city. I was doing very well at the company. I did not want to leave, so we made the decision, which was a tough decision. She moved over to the new city to continue her job and her career, and I stayed right where I was at in Cincinnati. For the next year, we took turns going back and forth on the weekend, driving back and forth to see each other. So during the week, we didn't see each other at all. On the weekends, one of us made the commute so that we could see each other. During that time, what I found was that it opened up more opportunities for me to learn the business. So I spent even more time in the office than I was already doing. I would come home from the office and I would spend more time on the computer learning that business. So really, like I said before, I became consumed by the business, wanting to know it backwards and forwards. But after a year, it kind of took its toll on our relationship, not in a bad way, but we missed each other. So I went and approached my bosses and said, hey, look, I would like to move over there. Now, you got to remember, this is over a decade ago, so at that time, remote working was not a thing. Everybody knows about remote working. It came from COVID. It just wasn't a thing back then. Everybody wanted you in the office, in your seat, in your cubicle, to be present. So because it wasn't a thing, they weren't keen on the idea. It made the decision for me real simple. I really loved her at the time. I wanted to be with her. I felt like we were missing out on some of the things as far as growing a family. So I made the hard decision to give up my career and move over to be with her. So I did. I put in my 2 weeks notice, and ultimately I left the company. I moved back over with my fiance. We lived over in that city for probably about a year. I took some time off again because I had a non-compete. So I waited out the non-compete. I still wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was doing odds and ends jobs. But what I found was I really still had that entrepreneurial spirit inside of me, and I wanted to pursue something along the same lines, but I wasn't sure what that was. I had an old friend that I knew from high school, from college. Basically grew up with him. He was a very close friend. His family was in the oil business. At that time, they had just recently sold their oil company, but they too were on a non-compete for several years. They couldn't do anything inside of the company, so he approached me and said, hey, I know you're not doing anything right now, but I knew what you were doing. Do you think that if we invested some money in you, you could start up a small business and do something similar that you were doing before? I thought about it for a little bit, and to be honest with you, I was met with a lot of skepticism, not only from my fiance, but from my family. They felt that it would have been a better choice for me to get something 9 to 5, go out in corporate America again. I wasn't completely sold on corporate America. We'll get into that in later discussions as to why I wasn't sold on corporate America. But for me, the pull was too much to ignore. So I called them back and I said, look, I can do it, but I want to do it on my own terms. You invest the money in me, let me have complete operational control, let me develop the company, do it the way that I want to do it, hire the way I want to hire, create the culture that I want to create. And he was on board with it, thank God, because I don't know that I would have pursued it had he said, I want to be in control of it. So he was very on board with it. He said, look, I don't know that industry. You do what you got to do, build it up, let's do it. So that's what happened. I took a shot. He invested the money in me, and we started the company. We started off with just myself, him, and one other individual. Now, luckily for me, because he had that other company and they recently sold it, they still had people on the payroll that could handle the back end side of the business. The accounting portion of it, the P&L, the compliance, the licensing, all of that stuff. So that was great. So we had some help on the backside. So all I had to do was get the front side coming in, the sales, the organization, the culture, get that developed to develop the company. So for the first year, that's what I did. I focused on bringing in new business, getting the company off the ground. We ran in the red. For those of you that don't know what that means, it means the company was in debt. But we ran in the red for about 6 months, and at the turn of 6 months, lo and behold, we had some success. It came from grinding and not losing sight of what I was trying to do. And to be honest with you, it was the fear of failing. I didn't want to fail because, like I said before, everybody was skeptical about it. I didn't want to prove them right. I wanted to prove them wrong at whatever cost. It took a lot of time to do that, but I really put everything I had into it, and I was pot committed, if you will. So at 6 months, we found out on our financials that we were actually in the black. And being in the black means we're starting to make money, which was great. So now what do? We're making money. Do we continue on the same course, or do we scale it out? And we'll get into that into some other content as well too. But we made the decision to start scaling it out. You know, it's working so far, so let's double down. Let's take some of our revenue, let's take some of our retained earnings and put it back into the business and see if we can grow it out a little bit more. So at that point, I hired my first employee since the inception of the business. We hired on another employee, brought him in. I trained him from the ground up, same thing that I was doing, what I knew from the past, what we were doing right now. He worked for me as an assistant for probably about 2 to 3 months, and then he caught the fever too. He was like, this is great, I love it, I want to go out, I want to do sales. So then we transitioned into the sales training. I taught him what I knew about sales, how to approach customers, how to find those customers, what the sales cycle looked like, how to use that sales cycle to your advantage, how to work it correctly from start to finish, to the close, to the repenetration, to the relationship building, and all the way up so that those sales weren't just one-time sales. That's the biggest thing about business, is you don't want it to be just a one-time sale. You want to create a relationship with your clients. You want it to be a long-term relationship. Long-term relationships create long-term revenue. Long-term revenue gives you the opportunity to scale your business out. So with that one employee, we continued to grow. He did very, very well. It's funny because that employee, when I brought him in, he didn't have a background in sales either. He didn't have a background in logistics, just like I didn't. I brought him on. He was a pizza delivery guy, but he had a degree in chemistry. He had ran a lab before. He didn't like working in the lab, so he ditched the lab and he went to work as a pizza delivery driver while he was trying to figure out what he was going to do with his life. He actually found that he was making more as a pizza delivery driver than he was working in a lab and managing a lab, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. You know, the guy's got a 4-year degree in chemistry and he's making more as a pizza delivery guy because of tips, but whatever the case may be. So anyway, long story short, he was really good on the phone. He was really good with people, making connections, building relationships, and so he took off. I mean, he started making sales. He really got, I don't want to say consumed, because consumed sounds like a bad word, but he did. He was consumed by it. He loved the chase. He loved the hunt. He loved seeing that he was creating his own paycheck, which is the great thing about sales. I mean, that's why we go into sales, right? I mean, we go into sales because we want to create our own paychecks. We don't want to be paid a salary and bring in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars for a company and just be paid a flat salary. If I'm bringing you more revenue and more sales, then I want to be paid more. It's called my value. That's what my value is. If I'm able to bring you more money, then I should be paid more money. So we got to remember that too. So I made a deal with him on a sliding scale of how he would get paid. The more money he brought in, the more money he made. And so he continued to develop his book of business, and he did very well at it. He was making very good money, and I saw an opportunity to, again, go back to the job market, bring in somebody to assist him, because at this point, his book of business was so large and so complex that he needed somebody to help him on the day-to-day operation. And because we were scaling out the business, I couldn't help him with the day-to-day operation. I was more focused on scaling the business, the back end of it, the P&L, making sure the money was going in the right direction, compliance, if there were any problems, handling those problems, that sort of thing. So we brought in an assistant. That assistant worked with him for a couple months. Again, it didn't take long. That assistant was very fascinated by the industry, and they ended up doing the same thing. They went from being an assistant to going into sales and starting their own book of business, and we just replicated that cycle. And we did that for 10 years. I kept scaling it over and over. Now, that's not to say everybody that I brought in worked out. Some people come in, and for whatever reason, it could be timing, it could be personality, it could be a number of different things. Not everybody works out, but everybody should have a shot to see if it does work out, because it creates a better life for you. So we continued to scale out the business over the next 10 years. I brought people in, I hired them, I developed them. Some worked, some didn't work. It was more of a trial and error issue as to who was going to work and who wasn't. And we can talk about how I learned from that in a later video of seeking out talent and hiring in the correct talent to help it so that I wasn't just bringing in people, keeping them there for a couple months, and then having to let them go, which is something you never want to do. You don't want to put people, back on the employment line, whether they're single or, God forbid, they have a family that they're trying to provide for. That's not something that you want to do. So you want to make your decisions very calculated, and you want to make sure that you're making the right decision, not only for the company, but for the individual that you're bringing in too, so that they're going to have longevity with the company, so that they can provide for themselves and for their family. So again, we did that for several years. Come 2020, we were very successful. We had a very good book of business for a company. We had developed it out. We had scaled it. We had salespeople. We had management. We had the back-end accounting. We had support staff. We even outsourced to support staff where they weren't actually working for the company. And that's something I'll talk about in a later video too. There's things that you can do for your company that would save you some money in the long run. It's called outsourcing, but we can get into that in a later video. So come 2020, everybody remembers 2020. Tough time for the entire nation, the entire world. Obviously, COVID hit. It was really made a huge impact on the economy. Luckily for us, we dealt in the food sector, so obviously we still needed to eat, so it didn't affect us as hard, but we still were affected by it. Things changed inside the office. You had to, at that point, if you weren't considered an essential personnel for a business, they wanted your employees to work at home so that the spread of COVID didn't continue. So we did do that, but we took a look at the company and said, hey, look, from the time we started it to the time we're at right now, we have no idea what's going on with COVID. This could last a year. This could last 10 years. We don't know how bad it's going to get, if it's going to get any better. Is this going to be a lifelong thing? Nobody knew what was going on. We saw our sales start to slip a little bit, which, again, affected the bottom line. We took a look at it. My partner at that time was off of his non-compete. He was ready to start something else, go back into a different form of trucking that was not food related. We looked at the EBITDA, which is a fancy way of looking at your bottom line, which your company actually nets out after everything is paid. We realized we had a fairly decent EBITDA, and so at that point, because he wanted out and wanted to start a family, he approached me and said, look, I want out, I'm going to sell the company. Obviously, this was a huge blow to me. We had taken all this time, all this sweat, all this energy. We put a lot of work into the company, and now he wanted out. So here was the real problem for me. Because of the company growing so well and doing so good, I didn't have the foresight at the time to stash away a lot of the money that was coming in for me personally as far as the salary that I was making with the company. So the company was valued at more than I could afford. Even if I leveraged my house, which my wife would have killed me at the time, if I would have leveraged my house, all of my investments, my personal savings, checking, sold the car, sold the dog, whatever you want to say, it still wouldn't have been enough to buy the company outright from him. So in lieu of that, I was on board with the sale with the understanding that I would still manage the company. We would find a buyer that would keep me on because I felt like it was my baby. I had developed it from nothing. And you guys out there that have done this, you understand when you start something, you're tied to it. You feel like it is literally your child and you want to be a part of it. You want to see it grow. You want to nurture it. You care about it. You don't want bad things to happen to it. You had a vision for it going in one direction. You don't want it to go in a completely different direction. I mean, think about it as if it's a child. You have this vision of what you want them to do and what they're good at, what their passion is. You support it, you nurture it. You don't want another parent to come in and tell them what direction to go and change your direction of what you were thinking about anyway. So that's how I kind of felt about the company at that time. So we put it up for sale. We hired a Six Sigma. If you guys know what that is, it's somebody that's comes in, looks at the numbers. They dissect the company from the, your P&L, your profit and loss sheets, and they look at it and say, okay, we want to get it into the most sellable or equitable position to put it up for sale for you. So luckily for us, we had a good back office team. It was already pretty much there. So we made some changes there, and then we finally put it up for sale. It did not take long to find several offers coming in. We looked at a few of them. Again, some of them did not make sense. Some of them were, I think, probably lowball offers, if you will, and people that just wanted to add the revenue to the revenue sheet. They didn't really care about the company. They didn't care about the employees, and that's not what we were looking for. Luckily for us, we did have one company that had a very big interest in what we were doing, and we had an interest in what they were doing. They were doing something similar, not in the food and beverage industry, but it was similar in transportation. They had a good reputation out there in the community, so we looked at them. We had a couple sit-downs. Long story short, they came in, took a look at the company. I sat down with them, told them my vision of the company. They were on board with it. I told them that I still wanted to be involved with the company. I wanted to scale it out. They were on board with that. So after a few meetings, them coming in, seeing the offices, seeing the culture, we sat down. They made an offer on the company, and in 2020, we did accept that offer, and we sold the company to that new owner. The company did continue to grow after that. You know, it was nice to see that the company was bought by another company that valued what we did, valued the employees that we had, the culture that we had, and I think some of it translated and actually them shape to where they are now and help them shape their culture a little bit and understanding what we were doing there. But that's a little bit of my backstory is, you know, we took a company from nothing to something. Very proud of it. We built it up, and we ultimately ended up selling it. And so that's what a lot of this content is going to be about, creating a company from the ground up to either keeping it in the family or ultimately selling it because you're going to retire and you don't want to have it anymore. So this content will cover everything in between there. We're going to talk about a lot of things. But again, I don't want this content, and I don't want these videos to be solely about me talking and telling you what to do. I can guide you through my experiences. Some of it's going to be relatable, some of it is not going to be relatable, but I want you to learn from my experiences as much as I'm going to learn from your guys' experiences and what you're doing right now. So the more feedback that we get on these videos, I think the community is going to grow, and we can help each other understand business more effectively, and we're going to cover a lot of different topics about it, and I'm really excited about what we're going to do here. Hopefully you guys enjoy.